Step into the captivating world of the Behind the Curtain podcast, where your dynamic hosts, John Dyer and Dr. Mohamed Saleh, bring together a wealth of 60 years of combined experience in healthcare and manufacturing. Join us every week as we delve into intriguing topics, weaving unscripted conversations that promise to take you on an unpredictable and enlightening journey. Gain valuable insights for your continuous improvement adventure as we navigate uncharted territories with enthusiasm and expertise. Welcome to a podcast that goes beyond the ordinary, unraveling the mysteries behind the curtain of knowledge.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Behind the Curtain. I'm one of your hosts, John Dyer, and with me is Dr. Mohamed Saleh, and we're here to continue our discussion about resistance to change. So, Mohamed, when we think about making change happen, at first there's a big resistance because people aren't used to having to change. But do we run the risk of doing too much change and feeling a sense of being overwhelmed by innovation fatigue?
What a great question, John. I almost face this in every single organization I go into because, usually the current situation is there's an opportunity in the organization. I don't think I've ever walked in an organization, everything was perfect and I didn't need anything. And so, some of the symptoms that I used to see and I still see as I look into different organizations is that people are burnt out. People's schedules are completely packed. There's too many fires in the air. And people are disengaged. They're not meeting their goals. Expenses are high. All the customers are upset. So these are all common things that create this whirlwind of challenges. And then here we come in and say, hey, we need to make some changes here to make this for the better. Well, they're already tapped as to begin with. And, there's two different scenarios that I face when I use the word innovative fatigue. There are organizations that have done this multiple times and it didn't work, or have just recovered from a huge change. Say they were deploying a huge ERP system, or they were in healthcare, deploying an EHR system. This is, people are now used to going from charting on paper to documenting electronically. Things are not flowing as they should. There's all these opportunities that are coming up there. They're constantly giving feedback and they're just exhausted from all this innovation. And here you come in and you want more innovation. And so I feel like, we need to recognize the level of fatigue individuals go through and that they're not resisting to change. They're just exhausted from change. And does that mean you just back off and not do anything? Absolutely not. That's not what I'm saying. But I think we need to understand the factors that play into that fatigue and then dissect each one individually and not just say, well, you have to do it. I think many practitioners are familiar with the concept of a model cell and starting really small, piloting it in a small area and then growing. But sometimes the culture itself has certain characteristics that we have to overcome. And one of those characteristics is that, there is no risk to innovation. They copy from other areas. And so when you come up with, hey, we want to invent this thing, they'll be like, well, who's done it before? And if no one's done it before, they don't want to do it because they're just exhausted from the change. I call that like, it's not invented here. And so it's someone else has to invent it, get all the bugs out, and then we'll just purchase it or deploy it here. And, a lot of consultants and a lot of organizations thrive on delivering their products to organizations who have that not invented here mentality. But the people that are not inventing it here are just burnt out And so we need to understand that and say it's not that they don't want to do that, but there's a risk that they are just not willing to take right now because they're just exhausted. So before I move on to the next factor, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you mentioned about how part of this fatigue may be that we tried it before and it didn't work, and why should we try it again? As a change agent, it's important to understand what did happen in the past, right? And how did that lead to this resistance to change? I remember in one plant that I visited, they I was briefed before going into the plant, and I was told, don't use the word shadow board. And I'm like, why? It's just a tool, what? Why? And they said, well, that they had these shadow boards basically were shoved down the throats of all the employees, and they were told they had to use them. They weren't allowed to design them the way they wanted it, and then they were given no time to actually put the tools back. So they had to do that on their own time after they clocked out. There was no process for replacing tools that broke or got missing. And so eventually the employees rebelled and refused to populate the shadow boards. And then it got so bad that they can't even use the term any longer. And what hit me with that would be like, like I said, it's a tool. If used the right way, it can really help improve the process.
Yeah.
It'd be like saying, I got a really nasty email on my computer, so I'm going to smash my computer and never use it again.
Yeah.
When in fact, the root cause was that it was not implemented correctly. It wasn't, people didn't think through, how does this impact people, and how do we make it so that they can do it well and not encounter that resistance to change.
Yeah. Before we go on to the next factor, there's I think another factor that you're bringing up that I think is really important. There's innovator deficiency too. And so we've tried it in a certain way and it failed. And so now we have almost like PTSD to that change, and we quickly run back to the old way.
Right.
And so and then you come in and want to explore that area again, like you said, like the email, smashing the computer, or stop using emails as a communication vehicle. And so because it just left this sour taste in your mouth. And so I think that's something that if we understand the background of an organization when we go in, if it's innovator deficiency or just not invented here mentality, sometimes the issue is that we've tried it before and it failed, and rather than learn from it, we just kind of retracted from it.
Right.
And we said someone else has to prove first that it works before we adopt it.
Right.
I think that's a really good point. I think the other one is breaking the will to share. I think that's another innovative fatigue. You see it a lot where people's ideas have been stolen. I'm not saying consultants do this, but sometimes a consultant group would come in, ask the people for their idea, write it up, and give it to the CEO and be like, "Here's all the ideas I think we need to change," and they would take the credit for it. And then all of a sudden, the staff is seeing people take credit for their ideas. Well, that kills trust and silences them moving forward because they feel like their ideas got stolen. I think that's another reason you see innovative fatigue. Sometimes it's like, oh, the organization doesn't trust you. Well, no, they've spoken up before. You've stolen the credit, and it doesn't have to be a consulting group. It could be their boss. You've stolen the credit, and now you want to, Mohammed and John come in, and all of a sudden you want them to speak up. We're like, I'm not speaking up. I've spoken up before, and all my ideas were stolen. And so that usually causes, I think, one of the factors that play into the innovative fatigue.
Yeah, you know what? One of the scenes that I wrote about in my book, the book is fictional, but it's based on real events with
Yeah.
real people. But I had to change the names and the company to not put anybody on the spot. But in this one particular scene that I really like is the head of operations is asked to go out and start getting some ideas from the frontline leaders,
Yeah.
the employees on the production line. And she's never had to do this before, right? So she's very awkward in, how do I approach the employees? Well, she sees an employee who is on a break. Her name's Mary, and she introduces herself, which indicates to the reader that she doesn't, up to that point, hadn't spent a whole lot of time out on the shop floor. And then shares with her that, hey, we're looking for ideas for improvement, thinking that this was going to be easy. Okay, just tell me one or two ideas and then I can move on and with the rest of my day. Well, she's kind of shocked by Mary's reaction. Mary's reaction is first is like, oh my gosh, you've never spoken to me before. Am I in trouble? Am I going to get fired? Why are you out here talking to me? Because the trust was so poor that the initial reaction is the only reason you're talking to me is there must be something bad. And then the head of operations, her name's Susan. She has to say, well, no, I'm here because I really want to learn from you and get your ideas. And then her next reactions, Mary's, to your point, was, well, what are you going to do with my ideas? Are you just going to steal them and then use that to get yourself promoted? Is that why you're out here? So again, because of that lack of trust, it went from, I'm going to get fired to, oh, you must have some other purpose that's not good for me. So why should I tell you anything?
Yeah.
And then Susan gets frustrated and says, all right, this was a bad idea. I knew this wasn't going to go anywhere. And she gets up to leave. And Mary finally calls out and says, hey, I do have some ideas. If I share them with you, what are you going to do? And then she explains, well, we're going to write them up, we're going to post them, and we're going to start putting some teams together to make improvements happen. And so she finally then gets comfortable enough to start sharing some of her ideas. And then Susan's blown away, the head of operations,
Yeah.
because she's like, oh my goodness, she really does have some good ideas. This is incredible. She didn't have a college degree like I do. But she's been sitting there, working on the line for 10 years, thinking about this the whole time. And finally, someone asks her for her ideas, and it's like a dam bursting because she's been waiting all this time to tell someone how much better the process could be, but she'd never been asked.
You know,
So,
I
but
love
again,
that.
it's that initial reaction. If you don't have that trust built,
Hmm.
don't be surprised if the first reaction from the people you're thinking will be all on board with this is, oh no, wait, time out. I don't trust you enough to share with you my ideas yet.
Yeah. So, I think the another factor that you bring up as well, you kind of that story had a two-part to it. The not wanting to speak up, and then the second one is, what are you going to do with my idea? Are you going to steal it? And so, we talked about, like, one of the factors being that, not there's no will to share. But another one, I think that's a very important factor is, and there's a book called Conquering Innovative Fatigue, I think is one of my favorite books. They really dive into this aspect around flaws in decision making, and visions. And so, which deteriorates trust. And so, I think that's another huge factor as well, is if your leader is very short-sighted, like, say, Mohammed and John and Jared were all on the same team, and we did an improvement event, and, Mohammed got fired over it. Um, what's going to happen to Jared and John? Like it becomes paralyzing at that point because why? Because there was a flaw in decision making. It was a very short-sighted approach. And we were like, oh, we don't need three people. We're going to right size and we're going to do it to two. And then Mohammed is gone. And then Jared and John are like, we're not going to improve anymore. And then we come in and say, hey, we need to make some changes here. I'm like, no, no, you don't. Like, the last group of people that came in here, we got laid off. My buddies, I watched them walk out of the door. And so I think that follows the theme of a lack of trust.
Right.
But I think one is more around breaking the will to share, and the other is really a flaw in decision making. And that we see that a lot too.
Yeah, one of the chapters in my book is titled "Don't Do Stupid Stuff," right? And that's
Yeah.
one of the stupid things, right? Is to, oh, we're going to pull a team together, ask them to improve the process, and then realize that, wait a minute, we improved it so well, we no longer need 20% of the employees, so let's get rid of them.
Yeah.
And then at that point, no one in the organization will ever contribute another idea for improvement.
Yeah.
I mean, your improvement efforts will go to zero after that. And trust will also drop to zero after that. And you
Yeah.
will have a hostile workforce. So that is under the category of doing stupid stuff.
Yeah.
Now, people will say, well, wait a minute. How do we show that we've actually saved some money by doing lean? How do we show, that our costs have improved? And it's like, well, first of all, if you do free up those resources, you can use attrition, right, to let people naturally rotate off the payroll and not replace them. Or you could put those people that have been freed up to work on improvement ideas, actually, have some additional resources to make improvement happen until jobs do open up. Or, and this is, I think, the biggest thing, and this is why it requires everyone in the entire organization to be on board with this, is, hey, instead of laying off those 20% of the people, why don't you sell 20% more stuff?
Yeah.
Right? Because the margins on those additional units will now be amazing because you've already paid the overhead, you've already covered the cost of the capital equipment. You already are paying for the labor. The only additional cost is material, and that's usually about 30% of the total cost. Well, guess what? That means your margins on that additional output would be 70%, which is amazing.
Yeah.
But that requires the salespeople to be on board and the marketing people to be on board, and the willingness to maybe even say, you know what? We could even give a few discounts because the margins are so big to our best customers. We could actually say, hey, we're running a 6-month sale on this particular product. Well, you have to be, brave enough to do that, knowing that the margins are so good on that additional 20% because you freed up that capacity.
Yeah. And that goes back to a good vision.
Right.
And so, like one of my, non-negotiables is exactly what you just said. When I go into a company and make a transformation, I would ask they would like, we need 15% of our labor, we're 15% over on our labor costs. We need to cut that. And I would say, okay, well, we could cut 50% of expenses as long as we could do 15% more growth. And you could subsidize that for that and then grow. But if you're not going to have a growth strategy, then you're actually cornering yourself to that. And at one point, you're going to have to make the decision to cut people unless it's linked to a growth strategy. But that goes back to the flaw in decision making and not having a vision. And so I think that's a huge factor that plays into why there's innovator fatigue, because we paralyze organizations because we don't have a vision and we're very short-sighted.
Yeah, one of the articles I wrote was titled "Getting into the Cost-Cutting Death Spiral."
Yeah.
Which is exactly what you're talking about, right? Is that if you don't have a vision for growing and your whole focus is to meet your numbers by cutting cost, well, guess what? You cut those costs, morale drops, people's productivity drops because of the fatigue, and then you have to cut more costs because your sales have dropped. and the quality is dropped and the scrap goes up. And, so then you cut more costs, which drives morale even lower. And then, before you know it, you're out of business.
Yeah.
And so I don't know why people can't see that. It's just like so intuitive that, if that's your focus is cutting costs, you might as well just shut the business down now, because it's going to be there. You're going to reach that point at some point in the future.
Yeah, I have a dear friend. His name is Bruce, and he would always tell his people, "You can't cut your way to profit." Like it doesn't work, and that kind of resonated with me, and it's kind of stuck with me a big portion of my career. I would say the last factor, just for time's sake, is that there's sometimes unfortunate legal or IP or some policy challenges that prevent people from making changes. So I remember I was working on a cell, and we were working on an area that we wanted to make into a cell, but by moving everything required validation again. Everything required the government to come in and assess it. It required all these things, which almost demotivated people from making these changes. And the amount of effort it took to make something simple changes of just moving a few equipments around and just recalibrating a few things was like this monumental thing. And we got into IP issues of if we do that, there's another company that has the intellectual property around that thought process. And I think that's a factor of innovative fatigue. I would say it's the least visible one, but we just need to acknowledge that sometimes it does exist, that we try to make some changes in through regulations and, I would call external pressures. It kind of holds some of our initiatives back.
Yeah, and I think what I would say on that is first, always ask the question.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we think things are stopping us because of legal issues or IP issues, and it turns out that that's not the case.
Yeah.
And we just didn't bother to ask the question.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is that sometimes we need to challenge our people. That's how you grow. So even though that might require a lot of steps to go through in order to recertify because of the government, well, guess what? That may when you come out of that on the other end, your people are now more of a team. They've accomplished something. They've actually tackled something, and so their personal growth may far outweigh the challenges and the negatives of tackling something like that.
Yeah. And I love what you said, because it happens to me a lot when we ask the question, because we've always done it this way.
Right.
And we assumed it was regulatory. And then when we ask, we find out it's not. I remember patients had to go to floors, and we said a nurse had to escort them when they go to those floors with a transport person. So we're double resourcing a simple trip like that. And then when we started asking the questions, we realized, in many of the states, you don't need someone, because even if something goes wrong, the nurse can't perform anything on that trip. She would have to he would have to go either upstairs or downstairs and then perform it. And so it's nothing that we couldn't train a transport person on.
Right.
But no one asked the question. We've done it like this for 30 years, and so we just assumed it has to be done. And so when we came to do it, they were like, "No, we can't do that. That's regulatory." And then we started digging into it, and there are some states that it is regulatory, just not ours. So.
All right. Well, hey, another great discussion on resistance to change, and we'll continue this in the future. So again, thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Take care, everyone.
As we draw the curtains on another fascinating episode, we wanted to express our gratitude for joining us on this enlightening journey. If you're hungry for more captivating and thought-provoking discussions with John Dyer and Dr. Mohamed Saleh, hit that subscribe button to ensure you don't miss a beat. Until next week, keep exploring, stay inquisitive, and stay inspired. See you on the next Behind the Curtain adventure.